So I want to start with Chad.
Okay.
You told me years ago.
Today is my birthday.
Today is your birthday. You told me years ago Chad was the best man you've ever met.
Chad is a very kind person, yes.
Is that still true?
Yes.
This is Lori Vallow Daybell speaking from behind bars in a jailhouse interview. She's smiling, cheerful even, and she's talking about the man who sits on death row, her husband, Chad Daybell, the man convicted alongside her in one of the most disturbing murder cases in American history.
And you've said you'll be exonerated, and he will too.
Absolutely, we will.
Will that be before he's executed?
Yes, Nate, before he's executed. You're well aware, I know that you are LDS as well as I am, right? And you're well aware that the three Nephites in 3 Nephi 28 were given the death penalty 7 times. After Jesus personally translated them, okay, they were arrested, convicted, and given the death penalty 7 times. And where are they today?
I don't know.
They're still wandering the earth.
Yeah.
This isn't denial, this is delusion. And it's the same delusion that led to the deaths of Lori's 2 children, 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, along with Chad's first wife, Tammy Daybell, and the shooting death of Lori's 4th husband, Charles Vallow. 4 lives, multiple trials, and a belief system so twisted it convinced 2 people they were divine figures destined to lead humanity into the apocalypse. This is the story of the Doomsday cult murders. The case began not with murder, but with a welfare check. On November 26, 2019, police in Rexburg, Idaho, showed up at Lori Vallow's apartment asking to see her son, JJ. His grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, hadn't heard from him in months and were growing concerned. Lori lied. She told officers JJ was with a friend in Arizona, a woman named Melanie Gibb. But Gibb would later tell police that wasn't true. Lori had asked her to lie about JJ's whereabouts. The next day, when police returned to follow up, Lori and her new husband, Chad Daybell, had fled to Hawaii. 2 children were missing. Their mother was gone. And investigators began piecing together a timeline that would reveal a string of suspicious deaths, all connected to Lori and Chad's doomsday beliefs. But the children's deaths were only part of a much larger pattern. A trail of bodies surrounded this couple, each death more suspicious than the last. And at the center of it all was a twisted ideology about the end of the world, spirit possession, and the need to eliminate anyone they believed had been taken over by darkness. Lori Vallow Daybell and her husband Chad Daybell weren't just killers, they were members of an extreme doomsday cult, who believed they were central figures in an approaching apocalypse. Prosecutors would later describe their crimes as driven by sex, money, and power, with Lori viewing herself as a goddess and Chad as a prophet. The investigation would span 2 states, involve the FBI, and reveal a calculated plot involving life insurance fraud, religious fanaticism, and cold-blooded murder. To understand how 2 innocent children ended up in shallow graves, you have to understand the woman who put them there. Lori Vallow was born in 1973, a former beauty queen who seemed to live a relatively normal life for years. She had been married 4 times before she met Chad Daybell, but around 2015, something shifted. Lori began adopting increasingly extreme apocalyptic views, influenced heavily by fringe Mormon beliefs that went far beyond mainstream religious doctrine. She met Chad Daybell through religious circles. Chad was a self-published author who wrote apocalyptic fiction. He claimed to have visions, said he had lived past lives, and believed he had been a figure named James the Less in a previous existence. He also worked as a gravedigger, a detail that would become chillingly relevant later. Chad and Lori's relationship quickly developed into an affair, and with it came an increasingly dangerous worldview.
Lori, from what I understand, said that she has been on 21 planets and Chad has been on 31
I wouldn't say planets, but I would just say lives.
lives.
Mm-hmm.
So she's had 21 lives
Mm-hmm.
and he's had 31. He was a holy ghost and has had 5 lives on this earth, and she's had 4 lives.
The couple became part of Preparing a People, a prepper network that promoted end times preparation. But their beliefs went far beyond stockpiling food and water. They developed an entire system for categorizing people based on whether they were light or dark. They believed in reincarnation, past lives, and most dangerously, they believed that certain people had been possessed by evil spirits, turning them into what they called zombies. According to their twisted logic, these zombies needed to be eliminated to prepare for the end times.
She had said that he had turned into a zombie the day before I got there. It doesn't add up.
And the people they labeled as zombies, they were the ones who stood in the way of Lori and Chad's relationship, their financial gain, or their delusional prophecies. The first victim was Charles Vallow, Lori's fourth husband. By 2019, Charles had become deeply concerned about his wife's behavior. She had started telling him that she was a goddess, that she had been married to him in past lives, and that dark spirits were taking over people around them.
We're LDS. She thinks she's a resurrected being and a god, and remember the 144,000. Jesus is coming next year.
So what makes her a danger to herself and to others?
Threatened me, murder me, kill me.
She threatened to murder you?
Yes. And she said,
how did she do that?
She said, I can murder you.
I can murder you.
I will kill you because you're not Charles.
Charles filed for divorce and sought help, even going so far as to have Lori evaluated. But before the divorce could be finalized, he was dead. On July 11, 2019, Charles was shot and killed by Lori's brother, Alex Cox, at Lori's Arizona home. Alex claimed it was self-defense, that Charles had attacked him with a bat. The initial investigation accepted this story, and no charges were filed. But looking back, the timing was incredibly convenient. Charles had a life insurance policy, and Lori stood to benefit from his death, though the payout would later be complicated by the divorce proceedings. Alex Cox would become a central figure in what came next. He was Lori's brother and appeared to be her accomplice in everything that followed. Where Lori went, Alex followed. And where Alex went, bodies appeared. Less than 2 months after Charles's death, the children began to disappear. Tylee Ryan was 16 years old, Lori's daughter from a previous marriage. She was last seen on September 8, 2019 at Yellowstone National Park with her mother, her younger brother JJ, and her uncle Alex. Photos from that day show Tylee smiling, completely unaware that it would be the last time anyone outside her family would see her alive. Investigators believe she was killed either that day or the next. JJ Vallow, whose full name was Joshua Jackson, was 7 years old. He had been adopted by Lori and Charles, and he had special needs. He was last seen on September 22, 2019. The last people to see him were neighbors and Lori's friend, Melanie Gibb. Days later, Lori withdrew JJ from school, claiming she would be homeschooling him. In reality, JJ was already dead. Investigators believe he was asphyxiated with a plastic bag, murdered in his own home. But the children's deaths weren't the only suspicious events happening that fall. On October 2, 2019, someone attempted to shoot Brandon Boudreaux, the ex-husband of Lori's niece. Brandon was driving when a gunman fired at his vehicle. He survived, but the incident would later be connected to Alex Cox and tied to Lori's conspiracy charges. Then, just weeks later, on October 19, 2019, Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy, died suddenly at their Idaho home. Chad claimed she had died of natural causes in her sleep. Given that Tammy was a relatively healthy woman in her late 40s, her death should have immediately raised red flags. But initially it was ruled natural, and Tammy was buried quickly without an autopsy. Less than 3 weeks later, on November 5, 2019, Chad and Lori got married in Hawaii. They claimed they were newlyweds in love, taking photos on the beach and acting as if they had nothing to hide. But behind the scenes, a dark truth was emerging. Lori's family had started asking questions about the children. JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, became increasingly worried when they couldn't reach their grandson. They contacted authorities, which led to a welfare check. On November 26, 2019, police in Rexburg, Idaho, went to Lori and Chad's home to check on JJ. Lori lied, telling officers that JJ was with a friend in Arizona. When police followed up, they discovered this was false. The children were nowhere to be found, and Lori refused to cooperate.
Chad, where are Lori's kids? Listen, just tell people what's happening. There's people around the country praying for your children.
Then, on December 12, 2019, Alex Cox died suddenly of what was ruled natural causes, a pulmonary embolism. His death meant that the one person who could have provided direct testimony about what happened to the children was gone. To this day, many believe Alex's death was far too convenient, though the autopsy confirmed no foul play. As police dug deeper, they discovered that Lori and Chad had fled to Hawaii. They were living on the beach, spending money, and enjoying life while 2 children were missing and families were desperate for answers.
It doesn't add up. If they're in a safe place, why is she in Hawaii having a great time on her honeymoon when her children are hiding in safety? That doesn't even make sense. I think most people understand that.
Lori was arrested in Hawaii on February 20th, 2020, initially charged with child desertion and contempt of court for refusing to produce the children. She was extradited back to Idaho, but still, she said nothing about where Tylee and JJ were. The investigation intensified. Authorities obtained search warrants, analyzed phone records, and interviewed friends and family members. What they uncovered was a web of lies, secret beliefs, and a group of people who genuinely believed they were preparing for the apocalypse. One key witness was Melanie Gibb, Lori's close friend, who had been with the family in the days before JJ disappeared. Melanie initially tried to help Lori. In fact, when police first started asking questions, Lori had asked Melanie to lie and say JJ was staying with her in Arizona. But Melanie eventually realized the gravity of the situation and became a crucial witness for the prosecution. Melanie told police about the bizarre religious beliefs Lori and Chad shared. They would score people as light or dark, assigning numerical ratings based on supposed possession by evil spirits. Those deemed dark or zombies needed to be eliminated through rituals or death. Both Tylee and JJ had been labeled as zombies in the weeks before their deaths. Text messages showed Lori and Chad discussing the children in these dehumanizing terms. Zulema Pastanese, who married Alex Cox before his death, testified about ceremonies, end times beliefs, and Chad's claims of seeing past lives. Her testimony painted a picture of a group completely divorced from reality. Meanwhile, investigators focused on Chad's property. Phone records placed Alex Cox near Chad's property when the children disappeared. Neighbors reported fires and unusual activity in September 2019. One neighbor recalled a bonfire that lasted hours with a terrible smell. Around the time Tylee was killed, Chad had texted Tammy about shooting and burning a raccoon while she was away in September 2019. No raccoon was found. Investigators believe this was his cover for the fire that consumed parts of Tylee's body. Financial records revealed the money motive. Lori collected JJ's Social Security benefits after his death. Chad received $430,000 from Tammy's life insurance, funding their Hawaii lifestyle. Prosecutors argued the murders combined religious fanaticism with financial greed. Storage units Lori rented contained the children's belongings, toys, clothes, personal items boxed and abandoned. DNA traces linked tools from Chad's property to the graves. The physical evidence was damning. When forensic teams analyzed the burial sites, they found that Tylee's body had been dismembered and partially burned, while JJ's had been wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and duct tape. A plastic bag had been placed over JJ's head. The level of violence and desecration was almost incomprehensible, especially when you consider that this was done by their own mother and a man who claimed to be a religious prophet. On June 9, 2020, authorities executed a search warrant on Chad's property. What they found was horrific. Buried in shallow graves in Chad's backyard were the remains of Tylee and JJ. Tylee's body had been dismembered and burned. JJ's body was found wrapped in plastic and duct tape, with a plastic bag over his head. The children had been dead for 9 months, buried just yards from where Chad lived, while he and Lori celebrated their new life together. Chad was arrested that same day. Both he and Lori would eventually face murder charges.
Thank you, Mr. Archibald. This is the time scheduled for an arraignment. This is case CR 22-211624, State versus Lori Vallow.
The charges would be staggering.
So that is the charges contained in count 1, and that relates to a allegation of a conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree of Tylee Ryan and to commit grand theft by deception. I'll advise you, Mrs. Daybell, that the possible penalties associated with those charges are the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder is punishable by death or imprisonment by life.
But the investigation didn't stop there. Authorities exhumed Tammy Daybell's body in December 2019, and a new autopsy revealed she had been asphyxiated. Her death was ruled a homicide. Chad had claimed she died naturally, but the evidence told a different story. He stood to gain $430,000 from Tammy's life insurance policy, money that helped fund his and Lori's new life. Prosecutors also discovered that Lori had been collecting JJ's Social Security benefits even after his death, adding financial fraud to the growing list of charges. The case against Lori and Chad was overwhelming. Text messages showed them discussing people being dark or possessed. Witnesses described their doomsday beliefs and rituals. DNA evidence linked tools found on Chad's property to the children's graves. Phone records placed Alex Cox at the scene around the time of the murders. In May 2021, a grand jury indicted both Lori and Chad on multiple counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and grand theft. The charges covered the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy, as well as the conspiracy involving Charles Vallow's death. The trials, however, would take years. Lori was initially ruled incompetent to stand trial in 2021, but was later restored to competency in 2022. The prosecution sought the death penalty for both defendants, but delays in Lori's case due to her competency issues meant that she would not face execution.
All right, who's covering this arraignment on behalf of the state today?
I will be, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, you are for the defense, correct? Yes, Your Honor. All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. This is the time scheduled for an arraignment. This is case CR 22-211624, State versus Lori Vallow. Mr. Archibald and Mr. Thomas represent the defendant. Mr. Archibald, how does your client prefer that I refer to her through this hearing?
Mrs. Daybell.
Very well.
Lori's Idaho trial began in April 2023. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence. Testimony from friends who described Lori's transformation into a doomsday believer, phone records, financial documents showing insurance fraud, and most damning of all, the physical evidence from the children's graves. The evidence was presented methodically over weeks of testimony. Forensic experts detailed how Tylee's body had been dismembered with what appeared to be a machete or similar tool, then burned in multiple stages. They explained how JJ had been asphyxiated, likely while he was still alive, and then wrapped so tightly in plastic and duct tape that it would have been impossible for him to breathe even if the bag over his head hadn't already killed him. DNA evidence linked Alex Cox to the crime scenes. His DNA was found on tools discovered on Chad's property. Phone pings placed him at the property on the exact days investigators believe the children were buried. Text messages between Lori and Chad discussed Alex being busy with projects during the time frame of the murders. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from Lori's own phone. Text messages showed her discussing Tylee and JJ in increasingly disturbing terms as the summer of 2019 progressed. She referred to them as zombies in messages to Chad. She discussed their darkness levels and the need to deal with the situation. In one particularly chilling exchange, just days before Tylee was killed, Lori and Chad discussed how Tylee was becoming a problem that needed to be solved. The financial evidence was equally compelling. Investigators showed that Lori continued to collect JJ's Social Security benefits for months after his death, depositing the checks as if he were still alive. She also attempted to claim Charles Vallow's life insurance, though those attempts were complicated by the divorce proceedings he had initiated before his death. Testimony from Lori's friend Melanie Gibb was particularly powerful. Melanie described the last time she saw JJ alive, in September 2019, when she visited Lori in Idaho. She recounted how Lori had asked her to lie to police about JJ's whereabouts, and how she eventually realized she needed to cooperate with investigators. Melanie broke down on the stand as she described JJ, a sweet little boy who loved playing and watching cartoons, and how she couldn't believe what had happened to him. The trial was emotional. JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, attended every day, seeking justice for their grandson. Kay testified about trying desperately to reach JJ in the fall of 2019, about being told he was fine when he was actually already dead, about the months of anguish wondering where he was. Her testimony reduced much of the courtroom to tears. Tylee's aunt and other family members also testified, describing a vibrant teenager who loved photography and art. They talked about how Tylee had seemed increasingly isolated in the months before her death, how Lori had pulled her away from extended family, and how they had sensed something was wrong but never imagined the truth. Throughout the trial, Lori showed little emotion. She sat at the defense table, occasionally conferring with her attorneys, but rarely reacting to the horrific evidence presented against her. When photos of the children were shown, when testimony about their deaths was given, when their bodies' conditions were described, Lori remained almost expressionless. This cold demeanor shocked observers and seemed to reinforce the prosecution's argument that she was someone capable of viewing her own children as obstacles rather than people she was supposed to love and protect. The defense argued that there was no direct evidence Lori had personally killed the children, that Alex Cox was likely responsible for the actual murders, and that Lori's religious beliefs, while unusual, didn't prove she was a murderer. But the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Even without a confession or eyewitness testimony, the pattern was clear. Lori and Chad had labeled the children as zombies. Alex had been the one to carry out their wishes, and the children ended up buried on property owned by Lori's new husband. On May 12, 2023, the jury found Lori guilty on all counts. She was convicted of the first-degree murders of Tylee and JJ, conspiracy to commit murder in Tammy's death, and grand theft. On July 31, 2023, she was sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Even at sentencing, Lori showed no remorse. She gave a rambling statement claiming divine insight and maintaining her innocence, quoting scripture and insisting that she knew the truth. The judge was unmoved.
I will continue to love everyone I come in contact with, and I will turn this battle over to God. If this is God's battle, then the math doesn't matter. 7 lifetimes or the death penalty doesn't matter. God's miracles will abound. When a soldier goes off to war, he is a soldier. When a soldier comes back from war, he is a warrior. And Jesus is in the prisons. He is turning his soldiers into warriors. For the prisoners shall go free. Sometimes victory doesn't look like victory until it's finished. Prisoners who have been told that they will never go free will be free. And I want you to expect miracles, and I want you to watch for them because you will see.
Chad's trial followed in 2024. The evidence was similar, but the stakes were higher. Unlike Lori, Chad faced the death penalty. He was convicted on May 30th, 2024, of all 3 murders and sentenced to death on June 1st, 2024. He waived his right to present mitigation evidence, and like Lori, he proclaimed his innocence. But the legal saga wasn't over. Lori still faced charges in Arizona related to Charles Vallow's death and the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux. In April 2025, Lori's first Arizona trial began. This trial focused specifically on whether Lori had conspired with her brother Alex to murder Charles Vallow in July 2019. And this time, she made the stunning decision to represent herself. With her court-appointed attorneys serving only as advisors, Lori took control of her own defense.
Representing myself at these 2 trials was a constitutional right that I exercised. I could not have done so without my team. Before this long court journey, I only had basic understanding of the judicial process. I was of the understanding that both parties would be able to get up at a trial and each tell their side of the story, but I soon learned that the rules of law do not allow that.
Actually, they do.
The process is much more complex than that. It is not designed for that, although the Constitution of the United States was designed for that. The rules of law negate most of that.
The decision was a disaster from the start. In her opening statement on April 7, 2025, Lori became emotional as she claimed she and Charles had a happy marriage and portrayed the shooting as legitimate self-defense. Charles was a wonderful man. We had a loving relationship, she told the jury, despite overwhelming evidence that she had tried to have him killed and that their marriage had deteriorated into threats and fear.
98% of all cases in Maricopa County end in plea deals where the accused plead guilty. And I'll tell you why. It's so miserable in that jail that they plead guilty so they can go to the prison and have decent food, decent sunlight, and a chance to live. 2% of all cases in Maricopa County that actually do go to trial, of all the cases that actually do go to trial, only 0.2 end in acquittal. That is 1 out of 1,200 people who go to trial go home.
That's actually not the correct stat.
Is that a system designed to convict you? The rules of law governing trial assure that. As you witnessed in my 2 cases, the judge supports the state to achieve this outcome. So here we are, the state of Arizona has accomplished its intention. 1, to extradite me from Idaho. 2, to convict me. And 3, to add to my ledger of lifetimes. The state used countless taxpayers' money to transport me, house me, millions of dollars to wrongly convict me on 2 charges that they made sure judicially that I could not defend myself against. I know political aspirations, raises, and job promotions were at stake, so congratulations. I was convicted in the media long before I went to trial. We all know that there was no way for me to come to Arizona and get a fair, impartial, or speedy trial. And now that fact has been proven. The state of Arizona brought me here when I was already serving 5 life sentences. Now I will serve 7 life sentences. Will that be enough? Will that be enough?
Lori's behavior in the Arizona courtroom was erratic and confrontational. She argued with the judge, badgered witnesses during cross-examination, and made rambling statements that did nothing to help her case. When cross-examining Detective Nathan Hancock, she made pointed but ineffective remarks like, "Did you have any way of verifying that?" when challenging evidence, showing she had no real grasp of legal procedure or effective defense strategy. She also complained about the inhumane conditions in jail that she's facing and tried to gain sympathy for that.
The conditions of this jail are not for long-term confinement. You do not have access to direct medical care. You do not have access to proper nutrition. You do not have access to sunlight. You do not have access to decent dental care. In fact, when you have been at Maricopa County Jail for 1 year, they come to your door and offer you a vitamin D supplement because you have not been in the sun in a year. Imagine this for years. It is inhumane.
The prosecution presented text messages between Lori and Alex in the days leading up to Charles's death, showing coordination and planning. They presented testimony from people who said Lori had discussed wanting Charles out of her life. They showed financial documents proving that Lori stood to gain from Charles's death, even though the insurance payout was complicated by the pending divorce. Most devastatingly, they presented evidence of Lori's extreme religious beliefs and how she had labeled Charles as dark or possessed in the months before he died. Prosecutors argued that this was the same pattern she would use later with her children: label someone as a zombie or dark spirit, convince others they needed to be eliminated, and then act on those beliefs.
I would just caution the defendant, again, she needs to be very careful, and she's getting into areas that could open a huge door that I don't think she wants open.
The judge repeatedly warned Lori that by claiming to be a good, peaceful, loving person, she was opening the door for prosecutors to bring in evidence of her other convictions, including the murder of her children. But Lori seemed unable to control herself, continuing to make claims about her character that the judge knew would backfire spectacularly. The jury didn't buy her defense. On April 22, 2025, they found her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder in Charles Vallow's death. The deliberation took less than 2 hours. Then came the second Arizona trial, beginning on June 5, 2025. This one focused on the conspiracy to attempt to murder Brandon Boudreaux, Lori's niece's ex-husband, who had been shot at in October 2019. If Lori's behavior in the first Arizona trial was bad, her conduct in the second was even worse. Witnesses described her as feisty and disruptive, aggressively cross-examining witnesses in ways that bordered on harassment. She questioned Detective Ryan Pillar about details of the Jeep involved in the shooting, tried to challenge DNA expert Vanessa Mielke on evidence handling, and made so many irrelevant or badgering questions that the judge sustained objections repeatedly. Her opening statement on June 5th was rambling and emotional. "I am a loving person. I have never harmed anyone," she told the jury, despite having already been convicted of murdering 2 children and conspiring to murder 3 other people. She denied any malice toward Brandon Boudreaux and claimed she had no involvement in the shooting attempt. On June 6th, day 2 of the trial, tensions came to a head. Lori argued heatedly with Judge Boreski over evidentiary rulings, talking over him and refusing to accept his decisions. Finally, the judge had enough.
You don't need to yell at me either.
Okay?
Yeah, you are, and you do not need to talk to me that way. I'm very courteous.
Take her out.
I'm very courteous to you.
Take her out. No, you have been nothing near courteous to me during the course of these proceedings. Talk with your advisory council about the rest of your cross. We're going to resume in 15 minutes.
The courtroom erupted as Lori continued to argue. The judge, his patience exhausted, ordered, "Take her out." Lori was escorted from the courtroom by bailiffs after refusing to comply with the judge's instructions. The dramatic scene made headlines, with legal analysts noting that they had rarely seen a defendant so completely lose control in a courtroom. When the trial resumed, Lori was back, but her credibility with the jury was completely destroyed. Witnesses testified that Alex Cox's vehicle was identified near the scene of the Brandon Boudreaux shooting. Phone records placed Lori and Alex in communication immediately before and after the attempted murder. Brandon himself testified about the terror of being shot at while driving, the bullet missing his head by inches, and the ongoing trauma of knowing his own extended family had tried to have him killed. Lori made side remarks during Brandon's testimony, showing frustration rather than remorse. She rested her case without calling any witnesses, a decision that surprised court observers but made sense given she had no real defense to offer. On June 12, 2025, she was found guilty of conspiracy to commit attempted murder in the Brandon Boudreaux shooting. Again, the jury took less than an hour. At her combined sentencing on July 25, 2025, Lori received 2 more consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole for at least 25 years on each count. Victim impact statements were devastating. Charles Vallow's family called her a monster and a coward. Brandon Boudreaux described the terror of being shot at and the trauma of knowing his ex-aunt-in-law had tried to have him killed. Once again, Lori showed no real remorse.
I want everyone to know that I mourn with all of you. I am sorry for your pain. Losing those close to you is painful, and I acknowledge all of the pain, and I do empathize. I feel it too. If I was accountable for these crimes, I would acknowledge it, and I would let you know how sorry I was. but I have witnessed for myself what it is like to leave this mortal existence and return home when I temporarily died in the hospital giving birth to my daughter Tylee. When our spirit leaves our body and we return to the pure energy state in the spirit world, we immediately no longer feel hate, anger, envy, or resentment. I promise you. We come to earth to experience these emotions, but these emotions are immediately replaced by a blissful, heightened sense of peace, love, joy, and well-being. The moment our spirit leaves our body, we feel more alive than we ever did on earth. And we have deep empathy for those we have left behind. We do not want our loved ones to grieve or be sad. We know that they will because that's a mortal experience, but they come to comfort us. We immediately know the minute you leave your body, you are aware of who you are, why you came to earth, and that we will all be together again soon, and that this separation is only temporary.
Her allocution, she quoted scripture and maintained her innocence, claiming divine insight and insisting she was not a murderer. Judge Boreski responded by condemning her disregard for humanity.
Unanimously agreed you conspired to have Brandon Boudreau killed. Many people have asked why the state bothered to extradite you and bring you to Arizona, given the sentences that you received in Idaho. Trials are not just about seeking accountability or punishment from those who have committed crimes, but to give the victims of crimes justice and acknowledgement of the impact of being a victim. Justice demands not only recognition of the pain inflicted, but a firm response that upholds the dignity of every victim harmed by the actions of someone who has shown blatant disregard for humanity. You've left a wake of destruction stretching from Louisiana, across Texas, Arizona, up to Idaho and back again. Anytime a person victimizes a single individual, the ripple effects of their actions extend far beyond the immediate harm. And you have not victimized just a single victim, but many. You've shattered lives, you've undermined trust, you've sowed fear in the hearts of many. I can't imagine what Brandon and his family went through for those months, hiding, Charles's family wondering who's next. Is someone coming for them?
But even from behind bars, Lori's delusions persisted. In a jailhouse interview conducted in June 2025, just weeks before her Arizona sentencing, she gave a shocking glimpse into her mindset.
Jeff's like, what are you doing in there all day? I was like, I'm writing, it's coming to me.
When is this narrative going to come out? When are you saying the full story is going to come out? Like your side, what really happened?
I have written, I'm writing it, and I'm going to write out every single thing from beginning to end so that people can really understand, because you can't understand what happened with Tylee and JJ unless you understand what happened to Tylee in her life. You have to know Tylee's whole story from beginning to end.
When confronted about the deaths and the evidence against her, Lori deflected and blamed the narrative created by the media and prosecution. Even when pressed about using her dead children's Social Security benefits, Lori denied any wrongdoing.
Do that.
Using your kids' money while they're dead.
Okay, all that is messed up too.
How
That's
did you rent that unit in Hawaii?
That's
With what
all
money?
lies. Chad rented it. I did not
Chad
rent
didn't
it.
have any money until Tammy died.
Chad rented it with his own money.
Okay.
Chad was an author and a publisher and had his own company.
So
that's what I'm saying.
He made $30,000 a year. With
No,
that
but you're
company.
giving up facts that you don't. You're giving up whatever the state put up. They don't put up the whole story, Nate.
And that's-
they just put up tiny pieces to put together their own narrative. That's it. You don't know anything about our lives or how they were or what we were doing in the temple.
Most disturbingly, Lori remained convinced that her imprisonment was temporary and part of a divine plan.
So what if you end up going to Pocatello in a few weeks
Yes.
and spending the next 30 or 40 birthdays
Right.
there behind bars?
That would be God's will, but I'll tell you right now, that's not going to happen.
It's not
It
gonna
is
happen.
not going to be 20 or 30 years. There's women in here that have suffered the same things I have. They've been here for years, waiting to go to trial. They haven't even gone to trial yet. But it's an unfair system, and they probably will get convicted. And then we'll see each other at the prison, and we'll uplift each other there until Jesus comes. And when he comes, he's going to set everybody in the prisons free. And all those who are unjustly, wrongfully convicted, like me and like these others, we will be walking free on this earth, and we will be walking with Jesus, and that's what we're going to do.
In August 2025, Lori was extradited back to Idaho, where she is currently serving her sentences at Pocatello Women's Correctional Center. Chad remains on death row at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. Both have filed appeals. Chad's appeal was filed in June 2024, focusing on trial errors and evidence admissibility. Lori filed appeals for her Idaho convictions in May 2025 and for her Arizona convictions in August 2025. As of January 2026, the state of Idaho filed a comprehensive 59-page response to Lori's Idaho appeal, arguing that her trial was fair and that all of her claims lack merit. The appeals process could take years, potentially a decade or more, especially for Chad's death penalty case. In October 2025, an Arizona court ordered Lori to pay over $534,000 in restitution to victims' families. Given that she is incarcerated for life, it's unlikely this money will ever be collected, but it represents some measure of acknowledgement for the financial and emotional devastation she caused. The Vallow Daybell case has become one of the most disturbing criminal cases in recent American history. It's a story about how dangerous beliefs can become when combined with narcissism, greed, and a willingness to eliminate anyone who stands in the way. Lori and Chad viewed themselves as chosen figures in an apocalyptic prophecy, but in reality, they were murderers who used religion as a cover for their crimes. As of early 2026, Lori Vallow Daybell is 52 years old, serving multiple life sentences with no chance of parole. Chad Daybell is 55, awaiting execution on death row. Their appeals will likely continue for years, but the verdicts have been clear. They are guilty of murder, conspiracy, and a plot driven by delusion, greed, and a complete lack of humanity. This was a case about faith twisted into fanaticism, love poisoned by delusion, and the unthinkable reality that a mother could murder her own children in the name of a prophecy that existed only in her mind.